I had planned on talking about network games for the next 3 lectures, and the last one being a demo again. But if there's any topic that you thought of at the last moment, let me know. We can try to incorporate that, right? And there's a lecture on network games at Urbana-Champaign today evening. I'll send an email out on the lecture stuff. I think it's a 4:15 Central Time, 5:15 our time. And it might be very interesting because one of the hard problems with all this stuff is the disconnect that I sort of mentioned with the parking lot example, which is people who want to build something, do research on network games, think some problems are interesting, but then when the actual practitioners think of something else as interesting, right? And there's always a disconnect between those two, especially in the case of games. So if you see that lecture, you'll realize the big disconnect here, right? So the problem is, if you're a network, how many of you actually play video games? Like last time I asked the very few of you who play video games, right? So if you look at like the budget of like the big game developers like EA, Electronic Arts and stuff, right? They spend a lot of money on the game, the video aspects of it, the visual look of it, the characters and the storyline and stuff. So you have mostly artists who could have been working on a movie, kind of sort of working it on the game. So the storyline and how these visual characters look, they spend lots of money on it, right? So if you're making a movie, if you're making one of those blockbuster video games, you're trying to spend like let's say $100 million. $99 million goes to those arts kind of stuff, right? They spend very little on the networking kind of aspects of it. It's kind of changing a little bit, but mostly it's added as afterthought because they make big money on making these things look good, right? From like systems developer perspective, none of those are really that interesting because it's more interesting from art perspective, not necessarily from a computer science perspective. So there are many schools which are now beginning to offer undergrad major in computer games, and you'll find that most of them has to go to the art side of figuring out how the games look and stuff. We're not going to study that because there's nothing computer sciencey about that. So we have to look at the networking side of it, right? Networking side of it is mostly often people don't spend too much money on it, too much effort on it. But the hope is that's where a steady stream of money is going to come in. So if you look at the way Electronic Arts sells this stuff, they would like to sell this game to you. You pay $50 or something. They make their money off of it, and then that's the end of it, right? So they may not want to keep you going for a while. And the projects here are trying to move away from the model and have more of a subscription kind of model where you end up paying a little bit every month and keep you, right? And so when you start to do that, companies like IBM get interested, which is one of the things I mentioned before. So IBM runs all these servers, which typically they use for computing stuff, either for themselves or for the customers. And if they're not being used at certain times, and if it turns out that the game players are working at times when normal customers don't work, right? So IBM can make some money on the side. So IBM would love to sort of, when the servers are not being used, use it for game kind of stuff. So they like to make some sort of money. There are a lot of companies, including like CCP, and one of the game companies is the one who's going to give a talk today. They would like to get in on that too. So they like to figure out how to make money with these with the clients, right? So unlike some company like Google or something, which has sort of infinite money, so they don't really have to worry about. I mean, they probably worry about it, but not as much as these guys. These are small companies, right? So they would like to have a certain number of customers. The number of customers may not be as much as what you expect from a large company, right? So one of the anecdotal stories I heard from Intel was Intel does not get into a business if they don't expect it to be $1 billion business right away, right? They don't want to make a few $1 million here and there because that's just not worth it for a company of that size, right? But what we're talking about is companies of a smaller size, right? So these are smaller companies. They're trying to figure out how to get these customers. So they like to have a good storyline on the game, They would like to have a good storyline which sort of evolves with time that you're hooked on and you want to have subscription thing. So they don't want to have a static game which is constant for years on end because people would tend to go off. So they want to change the game in some fashion, and they want to retain the customers they have and hopefully grow, right? And they have to kind of understand how these users change, right? So the lot of work. So this comes from the Netgames, and there's a lot of it's a yearly workshop, and a lot of work trying to figure out how people play these games, what sort of a thing keeps them happy, right? So the part of the things which are involved is the latency and all those things, but other factors, right? One of the other factors is, I think one of these guys are mentioning was, if you look at that pattern, you may be able to say when somebody is going to unsubscribe, right? And they do surveys and stuff, and I think one of the things is having a child has a very strong indication that you're going to drop off, right? So people, once they have a baby, tend to unsubscribe and stuff. So it's sort of like the data mining kind of problem, right? But there are others. So if you can see the signs happening, so if you see certain kind of things, then hopefully, if they can detect that, they can offer the customer some sort of incentive to stay. They can give them discount or something, right? There are some users who are going to go off, right? So the other thing they said was many of the games. So this may be a stereotype, but most gamers tend to be living in the mom's basement kind of stuff. And once they get a spouse or so, they go away. They never come back, and there's nothing you can do to dissuade them, right? So if you get married and you don't want to play anymore, there's not a whole lot the companies can do. So they would like to see if there's any pattern to know who's going to go off forever, who's going to stay around, kind of thing, right? And that's sort of both of these studies. The two papers that we look at today, and both of them are trying to figure out from somehow can you predict what you're going to do. Can you predict that you're going to go away based on some of what we're observing? And if the game company can predict what you're going to do, then maybe they can do something, right? So this work, they were also trying to see what happens when significant event happens, right? So what happens if I release a new update? What happens if I release a new game strategy? How does that affect you? How does that keep your interest, right? And trying to figure out who's a hardcore gamer, who's just casual kind of thing, and that sort of a thing, right? So those are the two papers. The one way, so you can implement this in two different ways. One is you can actually, if you're actually the game company, then you have all the data, right? Because you're a game company means that you run the server. You want all the statistics to come to you, and you can kind of fix your client to send all the statistics to you. So you know a lot more about how people play when they come online and all those things, right? And in this particular case, the CCP is actually a game company. So if you can get access to their logs, then they can practically the logs can tell you as much as any logs can say, because they are the company which does this stuff, right? But it turns out that companies don't want to give you this stuff because they don't want you to publish this information, because then your competitors get this knowledge for free, so they don't like to release this data, right? So the second paper tries to capture this without actually getting the approval from the game company, right? So, like for example, if you want to see how people play in like Microsoft games, Microsoft has no motivation to tell somebody in academia. So essentially, the academia is the guy from Portland State who sort of who I went to meet on Monday. So they don't really have motivation to tell them, because they're interested in publication. They're interested in stuff. So the second paper tries to get this information in sort of a clever way, right? The clever way that they implement is basically you write a bot, you write an automated program whose job is to figure out who's around you, right? And you kind of you're sampling the system by essentially becoming a game entity, and you kind of see who's around you, right? And eventually you kind of build a model of who's in the class. So if you think of this classroom, right? If I won't let you figure out who's in this classroom, all you're doing is you're having one person come here and trying to sort of look through the classroom to figure out the class roster. That's the kind of model, right? There are some students in this class who never show up, right? So I know who they are, but you won't know that by watching this stuff, right? And some people who come in very, very rarely, you won't know them either. The other limitation is the companies don't want you to do this, so you're probably violating some of the rules to be able to monitor these things. So one of the things that they tell you is you can only see 50 of your neighbors, right? So you can't really, if you ask who's around me, you get an answer of 50, right? So you have to come up with interesting ways of asking this stuff, right? So if you ask like, tell me who are students, right? That's a sort of dumb question because all of you are going to be students. You don't want what you want, right? So you have to come up with the various kind of questions to ask this stuff. So if you ask them, how many of you are, students who are something, some sort of a query which will differentiate the different people, right? So if you ask, how many of you are born in South Bend and a student here and who are between 20 and 22, then you will get fewer set of answers. So you have to do this kind of a queries to essentially hope that the answers are less than 50, because if the answer is more than 50, you don't know what the answers. You don't get the whole picture, right? And that's the thing. But then if you sort of do this stuff, and if you ask too many queries, then the companies notice that you're doing something fishy, then they kick you out, right? So you have to ask in a stealth mode. You ask these queries which are interesting, so you can kind of monitor the people, but not enough to trigger any suspicion. And you look like a player, but you don't actually play. You're just monitoring all this stuff. And they did that for 2 years, and they show the stuff, right? So these are the two things, but you get the idea of what people are doing and how they are playing, right? So let's start with this one. This is published in Netgames 07. So this is the slides from the authors themselves. But essentially, if you want to run this MMORPG, which is what's that? Massive online RPG. Yeah, massively multiplayer online role-playing game, right? So if you want to run this stuff and you want to run a company and you would like to sort of get $20 a month or so fee and keep around 100,000 users. So you're sort of getting a revenue of like 2 million and you're trying to make money off of this. So this is not something that company like Electronic Arts or Microsoft would be interested, because you're bringing in $2 million a month, right? Which probably means that the yearly profit is so small that it's probably not worth their time. But you want to look at the stuff, right? So when you are operating on that small margin, you really have to worry about how many servers you would want, because you either have to own these servers, or in this case, you would like to go to IBM and get this stuff, right? Because that's one of the interests with the IBM stuff. And IBM would like to have a contract with you where one of you takes the risk, right? So IBM can say, we'll run this game, we'll run this stuff, and we will charge you the same amount regardless of how much the clients come or turn out, right? So if IBM was betting right, they may end up making more money. So if IBM predicted that next week there's going to be 10,000 users, they can say, we'll charge you for 20,000 users, but whatever happens, you only pay for whatever we charge, right? So their motivation is to try to figure out precisely what is going to happen and then try to game the system so I can get you to pay more. And you as the game system developer who's getting the service from IBM would like to get the same information, and based on this, you try to negotiate the things. So you're trying to figure out based on how much you have, how much you really want. And you also want to, so as a game developer, you want to see how you can increase the stuff, because again, more users means more money. So you want to figure out how to do this stuff, through updates and promotion and stuff like that, and you're trying to figure out how those affect these things. And you're trying to figure out who's getting disinterested and play this game, right? And this may sound similar to other kind of systems that people think about in terms of peer-to-peer, right? For a different set of goals, but essentially, movie studios want to know if a movie is going to be released, how soon does it go into BitTorrent or one of these services, how they become popular, how they become unpopular kind of thing. So people kind of do this kind of thing, trying to predict what the future should look like, right? So again, you want the data from somebody for a long period of time, and usually it's very, very hard. And they were able to get this particular guy because he was keynote speaker in the workshop 2 years back. So basically, you try to bring these people and attach them. And I was in one of these panels, and it's very strange talking to the gamers because they have a lot of insight about stuff which mean nothing to computer scientists, and we have insights which mean nothing to them, right? Because for one thing, most computer scientists are not that good at gamers, right? I don't know. I mean, when I asked, there's only one. I think like Adam was the only one who said he plays, which I suspect that the others are not really that good of players, right? Has anyone else played any video game at all? I never played a video game, but I'm a different generation, I suppose, right? So how much time would you play a game, like on a session? This is one class where you can actually say what it is, and that's perfectly fine, right? 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours a day, 8 hours, 12 hours, 2 hours. Yeah. Hour at a time. So yeah, hour 2 is not really who they would like. They would like to target, right? The game developers want to target people who would spend 6 hours, 12 hours, or something, kind of live there, kind of thing, right? And there are enough people who are in that category, and hopefully, if you're in school and you have some kind of a thing going on, then you don't actually go do this stuff. So your intuition of what should happen for the game is a little different than what these people do, right? So it's very interesting to talk to these people. So if you have the time, I strongly encourage you to listen to this talk at 5:15, and it's very interesting. What the intuitions are. So this particular company is done the EVE Online. It's a sci-fi MMORPG single world, so you don't. So apparently you don't go to different worlds. You're all in the same world, trying to fight each other out. So I believe that means that this cannot scale to billions of users, right? So if you want to scale to billions of users, so you're shooting each other within this one single world. So if you had billion users, then all of you would be fighting in this one world, and the system may not work. But for a few tens, hundreds of thousands of users, this is an interesting game. And apparently this is a popular game. It was released in 2003. So in the 4th year, so they had like 180,000 active users, right? And about 35,000 concurrent users. 190,000 users is sort of what the initial slide was talking about. So you're bringing in about $4 million or so in revenue, and so that's a lot, but not that much, right? So you can't afford to just ignore your customers. You want to figure out what's going on, right? So in terms of the MMOs, again, this is a sort of old thing. I don't know what the status is right now. World of Warcraft is the biggest one. They have more than half the market. EVE Online is this little yellow sliver. They have 1% of the market, right? So it's a smaller data. The next paper we looks at World of Warcraft, right? That's a bigger one, but you can't really go and ask these guys, give me your trace, because since they are such a dominant force, they don't want to tell anyone else what their secrets of keeping this stuff. So they don't want to give this data. So you have to do the stealth way to figure this out. But this is a small enough company that they don't really mind sharing this data with you, right? So they got the data for, so they had the authentication logs, which basically say when somebody came online and when somebody went offline. for their entire lifetime, about 3 years. So over the 3 years, you sort of get the trend of when people authenticate, when people go offline, right? And I think there's like 67 million sessions, about 1 million unique users, and total amount of playtime is about 17,204 years, right? So you get this lot of data, but more importantly, you also get important events that you couldn't find out if the company was cooperating with you, right? For example, so you don't know when they released an update, you don't know when they released a game, so you can ask them. So if you plot some graph and you suddenly notice something was very high on one day, you can try to figure out what really happened, whether something was done on the server or something was done somewhere else, right? So some of the times you release a new game, it becomes very popular, and then the popularity sort of goes away. And sometimes you see a big bump when your competitor goes out of business, right? So if your competitor goes out of business, you suddenly get all their customers, so you see a big bump. And that's really not something that you did, right? So if you're into these sci-fi MMORPG games, and there are two companies that are doing this, and one of them out of business, suddenly you get more customers because they have nowhere else to go, and so you don't want to learn from that. I mean, you want to learn that you shouldn't go out of business, but other than that, there's not a whole lot you can learn from that, right? So first question is how many players will there be on the thing? So this particular group has a long history of like doing this sort of a study. So they had a paper in earlier conference which looked at games by first person shooter game, FPS games, and again they had a 3-year data, over 440,000 player years worth of data, right? And compared to both these things, the important thing to notice is that, so again you're plotting the number of players with the time of the day, right? You see this diurnal pattern, right? So you see this diurnal pattern. In most of these things, you see this diurnal pattern. Means that at some point of the day, there's not many users, and some other point of the day, there are more users, right? And this is what you expect, and then you expect some things to change over the weekend. But it also depends on who you're marketing your games to, right? So if I'm marketing the games, if I'm marketing my game to South Bend audience, I expect this diurnal pattern to sort of follow my clock time, right? So I expect sort of 4 o'clock in the morning to be when people tend to go to sleep. But if I'm marketing it across a global audience, so there are other works which try to look at that one. I think this particular game is not global, but there are other games where they're global, where you get the sense that you can see when folks in Japan or that part of the globe wake up. So you see this diurnal pattern across the different regions, but they all kind of overlap, right? And luckily or unluckily, you have the Pacific, which sort of soaks up. There are very few players in the Pacific thing. So you see this, when Eastern Seaboard comes online, Western Seaboard comes online, then you have for a time when people in Pacific Ocean, who if they were there, would have been playing, and then you see the South Korea, Japan kind of things come online, and then you see a big gap, and then you see when the Europeans come online, and so on and so forth. So you have this diurnal pattern mixed in with lots of these things, so you can kind of figure out where exactly, how your server capacity should be. And you can also figure out where to move this server, and we'll see some of those in the next lecture. So if all your customers happen to be in Japan, right, and that means, let's say people in the East Coast are sleeping, that means the IBM servers are completely free, right? So it sounds like a good idea to get all the servers from IBM from East Coast, but all your customers are in Japan, so you have such a high latency that you may lose your customers. So it's not just you're finding the place where there's not enough traffic, but also sort of closer, so you get the right balance of both these things. But in general, you see a diurnal pattern. And so some of the things you're able to predict. So they have some prediction functions which show that you can predict the fluctuation within a week. So so I think the The one other line is the black cross marks is the actual measured one, and then the red line is the prediction function. So they can predict based on what they have with a high accuracy what the future load should be, right? And again, it becomes more complicated if the market is global, because then you don't know what's going on. And one of the hardest things to figure out in all these things is if there's some event which is out of the control of the system, right? So if it happens to be a holiday or something, then people tend to be home and they tend to play more kind of thing, and then that's not part of this model, right? So again, this one shows how the game popularity has grown, right? So on the y-axis it shows the player population, and it's been sort of growing like this. I mean, so when they did this stuff, they have about 15,000 active users at any one time, right? So what you really like to know is what happened here. I mean, what happened here is probably, you came online, somehow people figured it out. You would like to know what happened here, why it sort of went from, it looked like it's a decline and it went up, and you see sort of going up and then something going up here or going down. You like to figure out why things are happening. So the mechanisms for improving the population is, you can have new game contents, or you can send updates. New game contents, if you remember the game from the other day, so it shows the background and stuff. So if you have a new sort of world that you can play in, that's one way. Or you can add updates. You can add elements into the system. So if you constantly add this stuff, so you as a player have motivation to come back, because you don't want the world to be predictable where sort of everything. And then you can have promotions and marketing, and you as a company want to know if the promotion is working, right? So if you go to Netgames and you say, whoever came to Netgames, I'm going to give you a free coupon, you want to see what that translated into number of users. So so you can figure out whether the cost is worth it. And you have to figure out if some of you are leaving because of something. I would like to figure out who's going to leave and maybe give them price reduction or something to keep the count up. So looking at the impact of the game update, right? I think Castro was one of the game, and the spikes you see here are basically when the other company went out of business, and there's really not. So the long-term trend hasn't changed, but a short-term it spiked because the other company went out of business. You get a bunch of customers who you couldn't retain, so they went away. And marketing, after a game, you give out free accounts for a little bit, run promotions. You see a blip. I think some of these kind of small blips, you get more users who you couldn't retain. They just got the free account, tried it for a little bit time that you gave, and then went away. But if you look at the long-term analysis, you get the largest gain when you have a new game, right? When you change the gameplay, you get larger gain. The updates don't really add much to the set of the new customers you're going to get. And the hardest problem is trying to figure out how to keep your players from losing interest, right? And because you don't want to find out after they are left. You want to figure out before they left, so you can do some incentives. And the conventional wisdom is it's very hard to get new users, right? How many of you actually pay for any subscription service? Do you pay for a subscription service to play games? So you're the wrong demographic to reach talk about this stuff, right? I can't imagine paying $20 per month either, right? But people who if you pay that much, you're sort of finicky, right? So if you're not interested, if you're not doing something, then you tend to go away. So getting a new user is hard. Keeping a new user is hard because you're putting up substantial amount of money. So some of the reasons are, if you are a new player into a well-established world, right? You suck at it for a while because you haven't figured out all the rules. So you get beaten a lot. So you tend to go away. You have a set of hardcore players you want to keep, right? And the hardcore players want the game to be harder and harder, and that's one of the things that the EA folks were saying. There's a core set of hardcore people who want the game to be fantastic, to all the graphics to be good and everything, and they are the hardcore users, and they expect the most. But for a game company, they're not. I mean, you want to keep them, right? But they're the smaller slice. So if you want to keep the other ones, you sort of have to make the game not so interesting. If it's so interesting, only the people who know exactly how these things work would be able to play. The new gamers wouldn't have a chance to sort of play in these things, and then you tend to go off. And how do you balance this stuff, right? The other thing, one of the other things which is not in the slide, one of the things I heard from one of the panelists. Most of the game you play with the AI, right? You play with the opponent who's playing you, kind of stuff, right? So in that case, you have control over how the person behaves. So in this case, you don't have a control over your opponent, right? So how would you, from your sense, how would you design this AI agent who plays with you, right? So instead of playing with another human being, let's say you're playing with the computer, right? How powerful should that thing be in playing with you? Should it be really, really smart? Should it be dumb? Or yeah?
It should be like pretty close to your level, but not. You should be able to beat it, but it should be pretty difficult. So there's a challenge involved.
Yeah.
And like maybe be able to get harder with time as you get better at the game.
Yeah. So they said no. It's not you should be able to beat it. They said you should be able to beat it all the time, right? It cannot be as smart as you, because people don't like to lose, right? So you want to, the motivation is to keep you playing for a while, but you have to win at the end, right? So if I can sort of predict that you're going to be playing for 4 hours, I would like the thing to lose at the 4th hour, right? If I sort of know that you're going to be playing for 2 hours, I would like for this to lose in 2 hours, right? But it has to be such a way that for every player, it'll have to lose, right? So you don't have any motivation to make it smarter than everybody else. So the compute power really doesn't help anything. So the question was, if you have like PS3 or something which has like really, fantastic computing cycles, that it can beat anybody, right? But that's not their goal. They don't really care about that, right? So they want to sort of keep you interested, but it has to lose all the time, because otherwise you lose the stuff, right? So again, but in this case, if you're a human being, I don't really control those things, but I want to have some sort of a mix where even the new players get to win a lot, because one of the biggest thing is if you lose, you don't come back, right? When people lose interest much quicker if they lose. So you always have to make everybody win. And again, it's a harder thing when you have people, so you have to mix this around to make the thing going, right? So again, another way of looking at this is trying to figure out what is your level of interest, and sort of look at your history of when you're coming online, when you're going offline, and see if I can predict when you're going to go offline forever. So one of the things is, if the amount of time that you're playing in a week sort of keeps going down, then that's a good indicator that you're going to unsubscribe, right? So that's one theory, which is if I look at the amount of time that you're playing, so if it starts out at 2,000 minutes and it starts going down, maybe that's a good indicator to figure out that you're going to go away, right? The other indicator is if the time between when you come online, if that begins to increase, right? Maybe that's a good indicator to figure out what's happening, right? Or maybe a combination of both, right? So one way is you're playing less time when you're online. The other one is you're playing less often in a week, right? And so so this one plots the session time, all session times, and then the blue one is the session time before you're going to drop off, right? And before you're going to drop off, your time becomes smaller, right? So the blue line, so this is CDF. So the way you read it is you take a point, you figure out. So if you, let's say, this is 240, if you go here and the way it intersects, that means most of the players, like 80% of the players, have times below 240 minutes, because this is in minutes, right? So over here, with the dark line, 80% of the players play less than 240 minutes, whereas in this one, 95% of the players play with less than 240, right? So the amount of session times becomes smaller before you're going to go offline. So the companies can sort of use that. They can sort of figure out when your session times are getting smaller and then try to do something for you. The intersession times also tends to get long. So this is the time between those two sessions. So it used to be for the normal user like that, whereas now it's getting fattening out because this means that it's getting longer, right? So if you begin to come online less often, then that's a good indicator. But turns out the better indicator was the time between sessions. So if you don't play often, then that's a sign that you're going to fall off, and they can use that to give some inducements to keep you, right? Final intersession time is a very good predictor according to the study. So if they notice that whatever you're playing and your time is getting longer and longer, at some point that means you're going to drop off. So they can target you and then maybe give you a discount or something to keep you in the game, right? So this is one of the studies where they had access to all the data, so they can do all the stuff without having to guess what the intentions were, right? So I'm going to show the next paper. So this is from World of Warcraft. So again, here also, the amount of money you make depends on the number of customers, and also they sell virtual items. Within this game they sell virtual items. So the more time you are online, you'll buy these things so they can keep you, right? So you're trying to figure out all these things, and for a lot of reasons, these are very hard because the game industry practically lives or dies by this stuff, right? So if they know what the customers want, then you can make billions and whatever. But so they do a lot of studies to figure out so it's very similar to a movie, right? So how do you know if a movie is going to be popular, kind of thing, right? It depends on the cultural norms of where they happen. So the games which are very popular in Japan and South Korea may not be popular here, and vice versa, and all those things. But there's nothing to do with us. There's the storyline, which is not computer sciencey. The thing that we can figure out is to monitor when people are online, to sort of guess what's happening. So again, they're trying to do the same thing like we saw in other papers. So if I see that you're logging in at a certain times, and so essentially, let's say you went off here, right? You may have gone off here for a long time, but let's say you went off here because you suddenly don't notice. So I'm trying to figure out, can I figure out from here that you're going to drop off, right? So that's what you're trying to do. And then the list of reasons why you want to do that is the same as what you did in the last paper. But let's go to the. So the important part here is, World of Warcraft is not cooperating with you. So they don't actually give this information. So you want to do all the stuff that was done in the previous paper. This was published in the Netgames 08. Actually, last year's Netgames. We haven't had the Netgames for this year. So this is the latest study. So they World of Warcraft won't give you this stuff. So again, they show this strange graph to show that World of Warcraft is the biggest popular game. So what they did was they create this character who would play, right? Who's essentially playing in these games. So you want to do this as a bot because you can't hire enough students to kind of go in and do this stuff. So you want to build this stuff which automatically keeps going into all the games, and it shows up, and apparently there's a command \who which tells you who's around you, and you can give criteria to find out who's around you. And it's doing this stuff, and the paper goes to more detail of how to get that information out of the game into some place where it's logged, right? World of Warcraft does not want you to do this because they don't want to give out information about the customers because that's sort of proprietary. So you have to sort of get around this stuff to get this stuff. So some of the limitations are the amount of data that you can store is limited by what the company can do, so they have to get around those stuff. And they wrote a C# VB script program to do this stuff. And we'll actually, the last of the game things, I'll talk about cheating. Right? Cheating is one big deal with all this stuff. And the companies look at these bots as cheating because now you have this thing which is playing. You don't want it to be too smart to beat all the other players as a bot, and so the companies don't want you to do that. So again, you have to set up, do the queries to figure out who's around you, and how good you can do this depends on how you can get that, right? So if you ask for, give me the number of males who are between 0 and 50, that's going to be a terrible query because you're probably going to get 99% of the players right now are within the kind of thing. So you have to figure out, so you come up with this different categorization to figure out who's around you. And you want to keep doing this every so often. Since you're a bot, you just sit in the game, you kind of keep asking this stuff, and then you kind of logging this stuff, right? So based on this, I kind of build the statistics of who the other players are, right? How good a strategy is this? Like what do you think of the strategy? Right? So think of this as I want to figure out who's in this class. So I come in here, and so I don't come. So I leave myself here, right? So every half an hour, I just ask who's around me, and you guys have to tell me who's here, right? And then I use this. I do this for like 2 or 3 years. And then I try to figure out what happens to the students, right? What are the limitations of this approach? This sort of a sampling every so often approach. Or like what other things would you miss?
If there are more than 50 people on at one time, you won't know.
Yeah. So if there are more than 50 people, you will miss, right? So you have to find the right queries, right? So you have to ask the set of people that. Let's assume that you start off within the 50, right? I mean, it's not a trivial problem, but let's just say that's tangible, right? The frequency makes a big impact, right? How does the frequency affect this scheme?
People might sign in and sign out while you're waiting to make your query, so like short sessions will miss.
Yeah, so like if I did this every hour, right, I would completely miss this hour, this class, right? So our class is less than an hour. So if it happens to be in the wrong time, then I would miss all this class, right? So I basically miss most of this stuff. So the way to solve that is to lower my frequency, so I ask more, right? In which case, World of Warcraft will detect that I'm a bot and then kick me out, right? So you have to find this nice balance. So instead of doing 50-minute hour, if I did every 5 minutes, right? I'll capture more fidelity of information, but then you guys will get kind of bored and you start to complain because every 5 minutes I'm going to ask who's around me, and in this case, nobody actually kind of moved, and yeah, you're going to get things, right? So they did that, and they were doing this for 2 years. And the paper has a lot more interesting details about how they had to sort of keep this bot ahead of the curve so you don't get kicked. But they collected enough information. They collected about 35,000 users, right? And again, so if your query things change, I may start missing you. So if I was looking for, let's say, women, right? So if it goes over 50, I may lose a particular person. So I don't know if you left the system or because I don't see you anymore kind of thing. So hopefully with all these traces, I don't miss these things. And so they assume that you're quitted based on how long they haven't seen you. Because on the other system, since I have the log, I can go future to see if you actually unsubscribe. You can actually look at the charge, whether you actually unsubscribe because the gamer is cooperating with you. Here they don't, right? So they found that some people go off for months, they eventually come back, right? So this one figures out how long you've been subscribed, and so 60% of the users have been there for more than a year. So some people have. So about 40% of the users have been there for the entire 2 years. So that's good. these users have been there for a long time. So sometimes you see these people, they're active for a while, then they go off, and then they come back, right? So it's not clear if they unsubscribed or what have you, and we're running out of time. So I'm going to skip through this graph, but they have all the observations from here. But the point is, you notice that some of these things, the frequency that you're going off is a good predictor of what you're going to do, right? In this case, you don't unsubscribe, but if the similar thing what they observe in the EVE Online, if your session durations are getting smaller and the time between sessions are getting longer, then you tend to go off. They don't know why you're going off. They don't have the information, sort of information like what happened during those times, other than what you can imagine. Different ways of analyzing this data to figure out what the users were doing, and the amount of the session time that people play, right? So 70% of the players play longer than 2 hours per day, right? So practically none of us are in this thing. 25% play more than 5 hours a day, right? So there's a lot of people who play for a long period of time, right? So this is the hard. I mean, if you think of this is the hardcore players. They play for longer than 5 or 6 hours a day, but they need to bring in these customers, right? This is the customers who are probably going to drop off. They need to bring in people who are playing for less amount of time to subscribe to stay here. And how do you do that is sort of the challenge for them. So I'm going to leave the slides over there, but there are interesting stuff like people actually play during the weekday too, right? So this particular graph shows that the average number of gamers on the different times of the week. It's sort of low on Wednesday, and then it gets back to the weekend stuff. So it's not that people only play on weekends. Even during the weekdays, people play a lot. And the only time that people don't play is from 4 to 10, and then people start to play afterwards. And it could be because they're in different locations, or could be because, I don't know, people do work and then play World of Warcraft. And they do predictive analysis to show what is predictable, to see if you can predict long-term behavior based on the stuff. I'm going to rush through this stuff, but again, so there are a lot of this kind of work trying to figure out what gamers are doing, and we'll see how this is all useful in the next things, which we're trying to figure out where the server should be located, because this knowledge will tell you where you should play the servers, and we'll see on Friday.